Hi, everybody. This is Kumar Garg from Schmidt Futures, and it's my wonderful pleasure to invite you to the launch of the Learning Engineering Tools Competition 2021. Just for programming notes, if everyone could, stay on mute. We've got an incredible panel of speakers and sponsors and partners that we're going to run through today. Just as sort of quick programming notes as to what we're going to be doing. So over this next hour and a half, I think our goal is a couple of things. One is to really celebrate where we came from, which is that, this actually built from an incredible competition we ran last year with amazing partners and participants, and sort of celebrating a lot of what we accomplished. The second is talking a little bit about the moment we're in and what learners across the world face and in sort of our challenges, and what do we hope to accomplish this year. Third, I think we've got an incredible group of funding sponsors and partners who are going to be helping carry the work forward this year, and I think we want to hear from them directly as to what some of their hopes and aspirations are. And finally, what we want to do is answer your questions. This will be the beginning of an effort to start to get you up to speed on some of our goals for the competition, and actually the first bit of applications won't even be due till October 1st, so there'll be lots of time, but this is a way to get us started. But first, I think we want to start with, why are we here? What are the values that drive us? And I can think of no better person to kick us off with some opening thoughts than Eric Braverman, who leads Schmidt Futures and has been a real guiding force in a lot of our work in building the learning engineering program. So let me introduce Eric to give some opening thoughts, and we'll get going. Thank you, Eric.
Kumar, thank you so much. And it's a testament to you and to your leadership that we're here for the second round of our tools competition. Just delighted to welcome everyone here to today's event, and just wanted to say thank you on behalf of Schmidt Futures and our co-founders, Eric and Wendy Schmidt, for the time that you're all spending with us today. Last year we had 900 proposals from 55 countries entering the tools competition. Now that I think of it, I sound a little bit like Phil on The Amazing Race. They traveled around the world, and at the end, they won $1 million. But in this case, actually, no, they helped 1 million students. And we're incredibly proud that in a year where we could see such terrible loss of learning with the pandemic, that 18 winners were able already to affect the lives of 1 million students, with 20 million lives hopefully to be affected over the coming years. That competition showed us that the interest of this community at bringing the tools that are available to us today to be able to solve the hard problems in front of us now is as strong as ever. And we just couldn't be more excited about the beginning of the second tools competition. We're in a moment in society right now that is a time of great contrast. We can see that there are more people living well than at any time in human history on an absolute basis. But at the same time, that gap between those who have and those who do not is as wide as it's ever been, maybe wider, and is growing. At the same time, we also know that there are more tools than ever to solve hard problems. That's why we're here. And yet the problems themselves are getting fundamentally more complex. It feels to me often as if we're in a race. 25 years ago, I was lucky to be in a situation where I was teaching very young children, or valiantly attempting to teach them how to read, using extremely antiquated ancestors to today's learning technology. And what I discovered was just how difficult it was to use that technology well. It was a race that you could see in the eyes of the students that we were losing. Fundamentally, what we were able to do was offer them the equivalent of worksheets, but in a computer format. And for people that didn't have computers at home and didn't have the support they needed to advance, their opportunity was limited. And the hope that I could see in their eyes, but also that that sense that they didn't know what was ahead, that stuck with me for a really long time. I saw the eyes as well, that same look in parents' eyes this year during the pandemic. The sense that we know that things can be better, that there is something ahead of us, and yet we can't see the path to get from here to there. And I think fundamentally, that's what we're here for. Because we at Schmidt Futures, and hopefully all of you by being here, believe that this race is one that we can win. And we'll do it by working together. We'll do it by betting on ideas from exceptional people early. That's our mission. We'll do it by connecting people across fields, bringing the tools of computer science to the science of learning. We'll do it by competing ideas as we are in this challenge. And we're going to do it by applying tools from science and technology thoughtfully, given all the risks and opportunities that are available. We feel very lucky to be doing this not only with all of you, but also with the tremendous support side by side from Ken Griffin, from the Walton Family Foundation, from the Siegel Family Endowment, and from the Overdeck Family Foundation. That's because not only we feel as if this work will be better when we do this together and with their support, but fundamentally also because this work isn't about us. It's about the people we're trying to help. We're going to hear in today's meeting from Shalinee Sharma, my dear friend, CEO of Zearn, and we're going to hear from Sal Kahn, whom you all know, who's worked with us in our own program, RISE, which looks to find extraordinary young people, 15 to 17 years old, and potentially support them for life to the extent that they serve others. Those two will bring a lot to today's meeting, not just because of the quality of ideas, but because they share the values that we hope that everybody participating in this competition holds dear, which is that we can use tools to win this race. Sometimes it feels to me like in society, we can be afraid to learn about learning. And that's what this is about more than anything. We can't be afraid to learn about learning. We have to learn about learning to apply it well, so that every time we see the look in some kid's eyes that doesn't have the opportunity they need, that look is only about hope. So thanks again for being here. Super excited to see where we go from here, the ideas that come forward, and hopefully, like Phil at the end of the amazing race, we can all be cheering on a wide number of winners at the end. So welcome.
Thank you, Eric. And I think, your optimism and sense for things can really be different is something that we really try to carry in all the work. So I think one of the things that I wanted to sort of, double down on what Eric was talking about is the sense that, like, I think the pandemic really revealed a core insight, which is how little we know in a whole range of different questions around what actually works for kids and for when and how. And I think there's different ways we can approach that. Either we can say, well, we should give up. And I don't think that's what this is about. Or what we should say is, well, if we look hard enough, we can find one solution that will solve it. But I think we've spent a lot of time chasing the silver bullet. And I think part of one of the ideas behind learning engineering is it's a real emphasis on humility, but also on this idea that technology and data and continuous improvement can be the industrial revolution for improving education. That if we can just make it easier for us to find insights and combine them and keep building upon them, over time, we can actually drive a huge amount of educational progress and build it on foundations that are a lot more durable over time. So I wanted to sort of introduce this exciting panel that we have with, sort of leaders, that are carving out not only what are incredibly scalable enterprises, they're serving millions of students, but have brought a real emphasis on actually spending a lot of time under the hood in sort of engineering what they're building so that they're actually collecting the data, testing their assumptions, bringing in the research community and others, and sort of the exemplars for what learning engineering when done well can look like, because I think that's what we're hoping to really help build out through this competition. So to lead this conversation, I'm excited to bring on Julia Quinn, who's been our fearless partner. She helped get this going with us last year and did the inaugural prize and has been a real partner along the way. And Julia's going to be moderating this fascinating conversation among 4 leaders that I can listen to all day that can give us a sense of what's possible. Julia.
Thank you, Kumar, and thank you, Eric, so much for those opening thoughts. On behalf of Ken Griffin and Citadel, we are thrilled to be a part of this competition once again for round 2. And I could not be more excited to kick things off with an incredible panel of edtech leaders who have experienced and been working on many of the things that Kumar and Eric just mentioned day in and day out for years. So as a little bit of background to kick things off, obviously over the course of the pandemic, the role of education technology and online learning platforms has become even more important, and platforms and technologies have seen their users boom. One organization I've gotten to know well over the past few months called Talking Points, through word of mouth alone, saw usership increase from something like 500,000 users to over 3 million users over the course of 2020 alone. And all of the folks that we have on the panel today have experienced these kinds of booms and challenges associated with them firsthand, and are excited to kick off a great conversation to launch this tools competition. So I am thrilled to be joined today by an impressive group of leaders. We have Shalinee Sharma, the CEO of and co-founder of Zearn. We have Kahn, founder of Khan Academy, and more recently founder of Schoolhouse.world, and Dan Cogan-Drew, the Chief Academic Officer and co-founder of Newsela. So I'll invite all of them to join me now, and we'll start maybe with a pretty broad question and ask each of you to share some initial thoughts and give a little bit of background about your platform or technology as well. So what are the biggest challenges coming out of the pandemic that you are facing right now, and how has COVID-19 kind of both exacerbated challenges and created new opportunities for the work you're doing? Maybe we'll start with Shalinee, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Julia. And hello, everybody. And thanks to Eric and Kumar. Really excited to be here today. So I think the pandemic has both revealed and exacerbated some fundamentals in education in this country and throughout the world. And that is that a great education is still primarily something you get if you're lucky, as opposed to something that is a good, that's easy to access and is in a democratic way available. On our platform, Julia, as you mentioned, we saw those booms in terms of the number of teachers, parents, and kids coming to Zearn Math, which is a nonprofit platform that focuses on K-5 math, soon to be 6-8. And what we saw in our platform was we saw what's known as the opportunity gap. We saw that widen. So specifically, before the pandemic, there was a set of students across socioeconomic backgrounds that used Zearn Math as heavy users. They used regularly. And when the pandemic hit, we saw that everybody had a sharp decline for a week or two. The affluent students came back stronger than pre-pandemic in terms of usage. And the students in low-income schools, Title I schools, never recovered. For every week the pandemic has been happening. This research was done with the team at Opportunity Insights, Raj Chetty and John Friedman, who are just an amazing group of economists. And they stream out the Zearn data every week on their platform to show the demographic differences by county and by socioeconomic status. So I'd say the first challenge that the pandemic shows us is, that's the world that we live in. And to connect to where Eric began, which is that it's a world of so much progress and opportunity, but more and more, a small group of people are getting access to it. And the difference between the haves and have-nots are increasing. Well, If you look at what's going on in K-5, which will tell you then what will happen in 20 years, the pandemic has increased that. So that's I'd say one massive challenge. The second challenge is, okay, then what do? We have children who've had learning disrupted for a year and a half. Some children have learned more than they would have if they were in traditional schools, and that's the truth. And some children have learned far less than they would have if they were in traditional schools. And so the question is, in the fall, when children come back, how do we navigate that as a society? And specifically, the question that's really on the mind of the folks at Zearn is, how do we accelerate students? And so we have to be more productive. We have to take the amount, we can extend time, and tutoring and other extended time strategies are brilliant, and we should try them and use them. But in addition, we have to make that learning time productive, and we have to think about acceleration. And so I think the real question, I would say, for learning engineering, for, and kind of having lots of brilliant people thinking about, is how do we do that? How do we accelerate students who have unfinished learnings from previous grade levels and get them to learn more than a year's worth of math or any other subject in a year? Because we have no choice but to do that. That's it for me. Julie, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am. Of course, that was going to happen once, maybe more than once, we'll see. Thank you so much, Shalinee. And I'm sure those challenges that you just outlined are shared by the other folks on this panel. But Sal, why don't I turn it over to you to talk about what you've seen, and explicitly in the work that you're doing at both Kahn Academy and Schoolhouse, how you see kind of the role for learning engineering and potentially solving some of the challenges and the kind of inequities in the education space.
Yeah, no, thanks. And first of all, agree with everything Shalinee mentioned. And if we just look at math alone, pre-pandemic, so this is before all of what Shalinee just described has occurred. The data is pretty clear. A lot of folks focus on test scores and how many kids are at grade level or not, and those oftentimes aren't too optimistic. But the one I always look at is how many students have to get remediation in college. If you look at students who go enroll in community college, 70% don't even place into college algebra. And college algebra is essentially, in its best case, algebra 2, what really should have been taught in 10th or 11th grade. They're not even placing into that. So we're in a system where students are starting to see algebra in 7th or 8th grade. They go to 9th grade, take algebra 1, algebra 2, geometry. Some of these students take pre-calculus, some of them even take calculus. Then they go to the university system, and the 4-year numbers aren't much better. At the Cal State system, 65% of kids don't even place into algebra. So even though they're taking all of these years of math, when they get to the college system's like, wait, hold on a second. You have so many gaps in your learning, or unfinished learning is the word folks use these days. We need to finish that unfinished learning. And when you look at that, you're like, wow, and that's the biggest predictor for students not finishing college or not finishing while having debt. It's the biggest gate for a lot of students to get a college degree. And what's been happening over years and years and years is that, and we've all experienced it, or we've seen friends and family experience it, where you're in 5th grade and you understand decimals 80% well. You take a test, you get an 80% on it, and you get a C in the grade book. And even though that we've identified that 20% gap, the whole class will move on to the next concept, probably something that builds on that dividing decimals. Now you're going to do applied problems or word problems of dividing those decimals. And then when you get to exponents, you only understood that 70%, negative numbers, maybe 90%, but you still didn't know certain edge cases. Then you get to an algebra class and nothing makes sense because there's an equation with decimals and negative numbers and exponents. And so the real key, and this is pre-pandemic, is we've got to give students the opportunity and the incentive to be able to go and finish that unfinished learning. And as Shalinee mentioned, then accelerate. Acceleration can be finishing that unfinished learning. It could be accelerating at your grade level. It could be moving ahead. And every teacher will tell you, in a class of 30, it's taught at every ed school, you want to differentiate. Every student there is different. They all have different gaps, different unfinished learning. They're all ready to learn different things at different paces. But in a classical model, the teacher has to teach. They actually don't even teach to the middle. They teach to the 23rd percentile. That's what's on average. So you actually have 22% of the kids who are still lost. And then you still have 76% of the kids who are still bored. And so if we were talking 50 years ago, there was really no way to address that other than getting everyone a personal tutor, which would have been cost prohibitive. But now you have tools like Zearn, like Khan Academy, like Newsela, where you can now have one teacher have every student be able to learn at what's appropriate for them, be able to master concepts, the teacher can get real-time information on where their students are. So that was all pre-pandemic. And so some of our core beliefs as a nonprofit have been learning should not be bound by time or space. You should get all your core academic materials for free anywhere in the world in all the world's languages. You should personalize to the needs of the student, and you should be able to have some way to prove that to other folks eventually, get you into college or get an internship or get a job. When the pandemic hit, as you introduced, our traffic increased dramatically. We saw, normally we have about 30 million learning minutes per day. We saw that increase to about 90 million learning minutes per day. In 2020, we had 12 billion learning minutes on the platform. 6 billion were students and families just coming on their own. 6 billion were in a classroom setting. And so what we were, first and foremost, we were just trying to keep up with the demand, just making sure that everything was working. And then we just started to accelerate a bunch of things that we've always talked about doing. We've always talked about, hey, wouldn't it be good if there was a way to fill in all of your unfinished learning pre-grade level? So we created these get ready for grade level courses over that summer. And I always emphasize, everyone's been talking about learning loss and kids out of school, but kids have always been out of school over the summer, and documented that not only do they not learn then, but they forget. So we were just trying to keep people learning then. We were trying to provide some thought leadership about what does pandemic learning look like. And as you mentioned, and we've been working closely on this, another dream of the broader Khan Academy vision was, well, it's one thing to learn from a website, but wouldn't it be cool if people could learn from each other? And when it was just me tutoring my cousins, I almost I named Khan Academy just almost as a little bit of a dream. What if they're able to form a bit of a community, like famously Plato's Academy, which was the original one, and so we I started, and the Khan Academy team was so busy, I started asking friends, hey, couldn't we build a platform where people who need help could get help because of amazing volunteerism from people all over the world, from high quality vetted tutors. So we built a prototype called schoolhouse.world over the summer. By the end of the summer, at a relatively small scale, we started to see some really incredible things. A 14-year-old in California tutoring a poultry worker who never got his high school diploma, who's 55 years old in Iowa. And so we got our first philanthropic funding, and y'all have been incredible partners on this journey as well. A bunch of states have signed on because everyone's been talking about high dosage tutoring and the importance, it's great to have the online tools, but also to have the in-person connection, but it's really hard to scale and it's prohibitively expensive. And one of the really heartening things is how many people are stepping out of the woodwork. These could be other high school students. There's good evidence that near peer tutoring can be very effective, in certain cases more effective. We have teachers at private schools who also want to teach kids on the other side of the railroad track, so to speak. We have professionals like all of us who wanted, just like I was tutoring my cousins back in the day. And the big issues are everything Shalinee outlined: digital divide. Just as you've had a K-shaped recovery in the economy, you're having a K-shaped, I would say, recovery when it comes to learning as well. And we're now going into this phase where, as important as it was to keep people learning during the pandemic, it's that much more important to find ways for people to finish that unfinished learning going forward.
Thanks, Al. And Dan, would love to hear more from you about the way that Newsela has been approaching the opportunities created by the pandemic, and kind of how you think about your work and the differentiation and personalization that both Sal and Shalinee have mentioned as kind of a way to help advance learning outcomes nationwide or globally through Newsela.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity. And I just to build on what each of them has said, I think one of the things that this has really sort of shined a light on for us, this experience, has been an emphasis on student engagement and as a precursor towards academic progress. One of the things that we've really taken to heart has been the need to measure this. As a former teacher, and I think many educators will talk about how engaged students are, and they use the term student engagement. But we really come to believe that if we're not measuring it, then we can't really say that we take it that seriously. We're not setting targets against it. So something that we've done this year is to commit to creating a board level metric against which the entire company will be held accountable, measuring student engagement. and quantifying it so that we can then roll those goals down progressively throughout the organization. And what we mean by this is not the same thing as product usage. So we would draw a distinction between the goals of, say, the product team into getting students and teachers to use the product. What we're aiming for is, in complement to that, meaningful usage, which we would call engagement. And we're looking at that along 3 dimensions: affective, behavioral, and cognitive. Effectively, what we want and what we believe we offer, but we really want to measure, is that we're providing students with something that's meaningful to read. And the learning science shows, especially around this concept of value, the harder I have to work as a reader to understand what I'm reading. And myself, I was a struggling reader and pulled out and received reading intervention. Reading is still a challenge for me, and I'm always judging the value of the time I'm spending reading something because it takes effort. And the greater the effort, the greater the value. And so we want students to have an affective response to what they are reading. It shouldn't just be sort of a dull act of consumption or parsing or exercising strategies that which through simply on platform data might look like usage. We want them to have an emotional response. The second is the behaviors, and this would be typically the kinds of things you would measure using product metrics. And then third, cognitive engagement. And cognition should be evidence that students are employing strategies like revisiting answers, receiving feedback, going back to look at the answer that they gave upon receiving that feedback. And that in combination, those 3 dimensions, we're rolling up into a metric, working to validate that now and working to set goals against it. And I should mention that by way of context for what Newsela does, we work with students in grades 3 through 12, largely in the humanities, so outside of mathematics. And one of the great challenges that we face there is understanding, knowing that the research is very clear on the background knowledge that students require in order to apprehend the next concept. And something I've always admired at Khan Academy was this sort of Google map of math, the idea that you could understand certain dependencies and relationships, and you could plot a trajectory and understand where some of the gaps were. And this is a great challenge to anyone involved in the relation of knowledge, right? Where you're trying to build on a foundation through US history or world history, ancient civilization, understanding what knowledge students bring and what knowledge they'll need to acquire and how you can backfill where there are gaps. This is actually a tremendous opportunity, I think, for learning engineering to help us understand, as we would think of it as a content platform, everything on our platform is content. Trying to understand the right combinations of content that maximize engagement and then lead to quantifiable academic progress based on that engagement. That is the kind of insight that a teacher can act on in the moment of deciding what content to bring to her students, and that Newsela can make helpful recommendations. Again, treating every individual object, whether it's an assessment item, whether it's a standard, an article length piece of nonfiction, any of this exists in combinations, and understanding the most powerful combinations for student engagement for any given population in a given setting, I think is of vital interest to us, and I think to the field.
I think being able to do that kind of rapid iteration and experimentation to both measure the deep, meaningful engagement that you're talking about, Dan, and then figure out kind of how do you pull different levers to increase it with different content and with different students as one of the enormous opportunities kind of presented across the board by platforms that are taking learning engineering kind of seriously in their development and rollout. So exciting to hear about that, and can't wait to learn more about it. When you guys are thinking about this competition and the opportunities to seed new ideas, invest in existing ideas that are trying to incorporate learning engineering into that work, what do you hope to see from applicants, and what would you be most excited about? And maybe we'll start this time with Sal to mix things up.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm always fascinated. You know, I think as technologists, and I'm guilty of this many times, we have a bias towards technology first. Let me make a cool tool and then try to find a problem that I have the solution for. I think I encourage folks to think about the other way. Think about, you know, what is the real pedagogical goal you're going for, and then be look for the simplest possible technology. It could be chalk, it could be a light, it could be paper, that's technology, or it could be machine learning, or it could be something fairly advanced. The other thing I'm intrigued by is how technology can unlock human connection. I think we have, above and beyond all of the unfinished learning that we've talked about in math and in reading, we have an epidemic right now of anxiety, of isolation, of stress, of depression, and it seems like it's getting worse. And some folks believe, and there's good evidence, that it could be in part due to technology. But I believe whatever can cause the problem can also help solve the problem. So are there ways to leverage technology, leverage AI, leverage various things to actually make people feel better, get to a better place, get to a healthier place, connect with other people, be a little less isolated? One of the things about schoolhouse.world that I did not expect, I thought about it very, hey, how do we just get some learning to happen? But I now realize that one of the real benefits of it, it's great, there is learning happening, but people are connecting with each other. They're getting less isolated and they're meeting people very different than themselves. And I think that's, it's hard to fully quantify the benefit to that, but it has real huge, actual human benefit. So think in that direction.
I love it, and we saw that across many of our tools competition winners from the first time around. Shalinee, turning it over to you. What do you hope to see, and what's going to excite you as the tools competition goes on?
I love how Sal opened, which is try to start with the problem, and sometimes actually rarely it's your problem. So try to start with a more universal problem that you can see. And in edtech, I would say start with the problem teachers have, and make something teachers love. That's a great way to scale. And I think that's certainly true of Khan Academy and certainly true of Newsela, as well as Zearn. But specifically, I would say what would be so important and so exciting right now is to, even though it was always there, the pandemic has created more awareness and a greater difference between the haves and have-nots in the world of knowledge and learning. And so I think the question that I would really hope that folks in the tools competition and what education and technology, spends a decade on, is this tension between supporting students with unfinished learnings and at the same time not relegating them onto a different path that is essentially the slow path, right? So, if you think about it, what happens to kids? So there's a path, it's K-12. It's literally actually structured as a path. Should it be structured that way? That's a separate question. The reality is that it is. And it moves in lockstep and it moves with time. That's the driver, not with mastery, as Sal was talking about when he opened. And so that's the system in which we exist. And what happens to a child, let's say the pandemic hits and a child spends a year and a half not having productive learning, they get off track. Or let's say a child gets the flu for a couple of weeks, or their family's experiencing homelessness, or they break their leg, so whatever, life happens to this child. And so now they're off track. And the question is that we haven't tackled as K-12 is, what is the system to get them back on track? How do we do that? And I'd say that's the challenge for the whole country, as a country. And we call it in K-12, there's lots of money and RFPs and bureaucracy around what's called intervention. And intervention doesn't work at all. And how do we know that? Because what Sal shared, kids go to college and they pay college tuition prices and I think calling college algebra 9th grade math is generous. I would say most of it is really 7th grade. If you're actually looking at the problems kids need to do, it hits 7th grade standards. And so kids then go to college and pay college tuition prices, often financed with debt, to do 7th grade math, which is available for free in every single school in this country. And so the question is, and so there we know intervention doesn't work. And so that's the question I would ask everyone to be thinking about, which is, how do we build the capability when a kid gets behind that child can be caught up, or that child can even go further? How do we build that into our system? And we don't have it today in K-12.
Thanks, Shalinee. And Dan, anything else that you're hoping to see?
Yeah, I would just build on what both have just said. And I think that the importance of human connection can't be overstated, and that the technology should not be in place of the humans, but in service of them and in service of connecting them. And I think that the sort of inclusivity that Shalinee was speaking to, I mentioned I was pulled out for reading, and that stuck with me. Reading was a time when I didn't belong, and that should never be the case. Like, the learning environment should remain a collective social experience, for as long as it's appropriate for learning. And I think as we get older, we get more and more focused on the individual student, and we segregate them more and more into their own personal journey. And the sense of community with which they begin school and kindergarten is fractured and eventually lost by the time they graduate. And I think that you might think, that that's sort of counterintuitive for the goals of a learning tool. But I think it's just the opposite. I think there's great affordances, especially now that we've all been learning to sort of live through screens. There are ways that screens and sort of humble algorithms can bring us together and aid us in learning from each other. So models that support tutoring, models that support collaboration, models that are really trying to, I think, put forward the idea that, like, I win when we win, and that it's not just about my individual advancement. I have a stated goal to look out for my peers, and that same attitude of classroom community with which I began schooling stays with me, and maintains a part of my identity as a citizen, not just as a student.
Thanks, Dan. And I think shared across all of those responses were a real kind of desire to find additional ways beyond the amazing work that your three organizations are doing to leverage technology and data to help kids stay on track or catch back up in ways that personalize instruction, that kind of foster deep, meaningful engagement, and that don't kind of stigmatize students in the process. And we are hoping to see lots of applicants that touch in ways that help us learn over time about what's working for whom, and why in the space. So huge thank you to all of you. We so appreciate what you've been doing, and we'll be excited to stay in touch kind of along the course of this competition, and hopefully be able to tap into your knowledge and expertise as we continue on. So thanks for joining us, and I will turn it back over to Kumar to pick back up the rest of the program.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank those amazing panelists. A couple of things sort of resonated for me, which was, one, it was this weird moment that we've been living through where a lot of our partner organizations, the ones that have been building these edtech tools, are going through periods of incredible growth. Like, obviously there's been a huge surging enrollment, while at the same time, the gaps for what these kind of tools can offer also become present. So it just means that you have to run harder, but also think smarter at the same time. And I think it's great to get leaders like, have them reflect on what's still missing. Because part of the reason when we first started down this path was, the original tools competition was kind of a just-in-time competition. It was right at the beginning of the summer, almost 1 billion kids had been at some version of out of school around the world. And we said, well, there's got to be important work that people have for how do we get these students connected again. But now we're, a year later, I feel like with everything going on with the Delta variant, it's not like the world is fully back, although those of us in parts of the US and elsewhere are starting to feel some of what's different. But I think it's still a very mixed recovery. My own kids just went back to school physically a couple weeks ago, and then school promptly shut down, and they're now at camp. And I think we're still grappling with what they went through, what we went through as parents, and everything else. And so I don't think this is what I appreciate is we're going to be part of this building back. And I think part of why I'm so excited about what this second round will bring, which is I think people are going through a reflection of what is the system we want to build. the other thing that sort of jumped out to me from that conversation was just this idea that we can actually use what we are learning through these large systems to actually get smarter about what works and for whom, and to be able to use that engineering to drive new insights. So this next phase of our conversation is actually going to be to dig into what the competition will mean for this year, who is involved. So first, let me just start by, Eric sort of kicked off by thanking a number of our sponsors. Our hope is to really build a bandwagon, and I couldn't be thrilled to have such an incredible list of sponsors from our original co-leads with Citadel and Ken Griffin, to now have the Overdeck Family Foundation, Siegel, and Walton. And the nice thing is we're going to have some of them here to talk directly, but they're eager to be involved in sharing their expertise, their networks, and what they've learned as investors in this area throughout this. So I'm excited to have them on board. Let me just cover a little bit about what is different and what sort of builds, and makes the competition sort of different from last year. But first, let's just sort of remark on what we learned from the first year. So as folks heard, obviously there was an incredible amount of enthusiasm, and we got applications from countries around the world. What was interesting was we ran this in a phased process. So the first step involved just putting together a very short application, after which we gave feedback and folks were invited to put forward a full application. And that went through multiple blind reviews and additional feedback to applicants for how they could build research partnerships and others, and then led to finalists who were able to pitch a pretty impressive lineup of judges, and then to a final group of winners, which we've been working with extensively. And part of, I think, the thesis behind why we ran it that way is we really wanted to make it such that, obviously there's going to be a subset of winners, but we really wanted folks to benefit from the competition no matter how far they got. And, we also ended up with what I think is a pretty impressive and diverse list of folks who are building. And, we've got a number of details about what this winner circle is working on, but it really sort of echoed what, our panelists were talking about using technology in lots of different ways, whether it's using some of the oldest technology, which is like radio to get, lessons out, to using, the most advanced machine learning around speech recognition, and, in a range of different contexts, both in the US and around the world, and for a range of different types of students and others. And so, this set of winners is already serving a lot of kids. But what I'm sort of excited about is not the immediate set of students that they'll serve, but the fact that part of what really helped them win in the competition was that they were committed to the idea that they were going to continuously test and use the data to keep refining and bring in the research community. Because I think too often we sort of create the here's my plan as the end of the story when it's actually the beginning of the story. And so much of what we have to do is actually continue to test and refine and improve our work over time. So I want to sort of congratulate again the winners, and we're going to create lots of opportunities for all of you to learn from them in the coming months so that you can build from what they learned from their first year, as well as the incredible work that they're building. So let me go into the next slide, and just talk about one of the big changes that we made from last year to this year, which is last year we had 3 tiers of the competition. One that was a catalyst tier up to 25,000, then 25,000 to 100,000, and then a large prizes tier for 100 to 250. Based on sort of watching how the applications came in, we're actually making it a lot simpler for you all and sort of doing this as a 2-track process and upping the catalyst prize level. And so there'll be a catalyst prize track for up to 50K, and then a mid-scale and large prize track that'll go from 50K to $250,000. We're going to be giving you a sneak peek on all of the additional details on the competition that'll be coming today. It'll be posted on the website in the coming days. But for all of you who have signed on with us live, you can get a chance to start to look at those competition details, and we'll share them in our chat. I think the next thing I just wanted to sort of share, go to the next slide, is just a little bit of the process. So we're big believers in this being an iterative process where you can continue to learn and improve along the way. So between now and October 1, we'll have lots of opportunities for you to get smarter about what is learning engineering, what are a lot of the tracks that we're going to have this year, what are ways to build from what we learned from the first year, and the actual applications will be due, and the first phase of it ends up being pretty short, will be due on October 1st. And we'll do lots of work with you up to that. After that, we'll give you feedback on those original proposal designs and then invite you to submit a full application by December 17th. Then we're going to go through a bunch of internal intensive process as we sort of sort through all of that and give additional feedback, and then define a set of finalists, and then give them an opportunity to actually present to a judging panel and have winners announced. So that's many steps in a process, but it's meant to really give you opportunities to build out your work and for us to be able to give you feedback and for us to introduce you to a number of the funders and other partners associated with this. So finally, let me just flag the big final change, if we can do it next slide, which is we have competition tracks this year. Last year, we sort of broadly talked about learning loss and listed a couple of priority topics, but I think given the growth in our competition sponsors and the moment we're in, we're going to have 4 formal tracks that folks can apply under. And we're going to have some of our partners sort of talk about these tracks. I'll have them stay up here so folks can read them. But I wanted to sort of invite some of our partners to sort of talk a little bit about what is the theory behind the track. We'll, of course, share more additional information about them in the competition details. So first up, let me invite Katie Knight from Siegel to talk about some of our goals for higher education and workplace learning.
Thanks, Kumar. And I'm excited to be here and talking to you all and to be a part of this competition again. I'm really excited about higher education and workplace learning because it's obviously a critical need, but also a place where there's an immense landscape of opportunity that's really, really rich and diverse. There's actually so much that we don't know about how adults learn, adult learning science, and about what works at scale, that there's opportunity here to think about any number of potential solutions that build on some of what we've seen, anecdotally or work practically, and really reinforce it with the principles of learning engineering and be thinking differently about that. SFE is focused on the impact of technology on society, for better or for worse, which is another reason I'm excited about this piece of the competition. There have been some changes, obviously accelerated by COVID, that technology has contributed to in the workforce. And also there's a lot of opportunity, as the previous panel mentioned, to think about technology as a tool to solve the problems that we know exist. We are thinking that the context of this, in concert with K-12 is also a really exciting space. It's more than just the pathway, the linear pathway from K-12 to post-secondary education in the form of training or college. It's about the pathway that any individual is on as they're learning and recognizing that it's not linear, that it loops around and around, back and forth, and that changes to the economy, changes to your life circumstances. Anything can bring you back to a place where you need to learn more or learn differently, and give you the opportunity to be launched into the economy and have access to the innovation economy in a new way. Of course, also acknowledging that the context of adult learning and job training is bigger than just training, right? We can't train our way out of the mess that we're in entirely. There are other circumstances. So I think when you think about the scaffolds and supports that adult learners might need to learn, and how technology might be a tool to contribute to helping them in that way as well. The last thing I'll say is that I'm really excited to see entries and competitors that have a service orientation toward the principles of learning engineering, but also toward the learners themselves. And I think there's a really, really important element of this that has to do with taking feedback and understanding what people are experiencing as they use your tools or go through your programs, so that it's not just the outcome that matters, but also the educational journey that they're on. there anything else I can touch on? Should I?
Great. I mean, I think one of the things that I really like about this, Katie, is just that, I think a lot of what we're trying to do under learning engineering just applies to adults, right?
Mhm.
So this idea that there might be some things that are very unique to the K-12 audience, but there's actually a lot around actually improving the process of testing different learning science ideas and how can we rapidly skill, especially as we sort of have these global hiring needs, coming out of the pandemic, and what are ways adult learning does or does not. Sometimes we silo these things,
Mhm.
right? And I'm actually really excited about what kind of intersections. I'd be curious if there's if you have sort of one bit of advice as folks try to put together a proposal for sort of things to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is the right one, right? Adult learning doesn't happen in a silo. It's happening because folks were on some sort of continuum in their K-12 experience. They had maybe some post-secondary experience that worked or did not work well for them. So I think when you're thinking about designing for adult learning, you should think about it in the context of what we know about learning and don't know about learning broadly, and how this fits in, right? To the point I was making about the pathway not being a linear one, it's not for anyone. And so if we're looking at ways to use learning engineering to solve problems and answer questions, we should be thinking much bigger than just the silo of adult learning over here, K-12 over here. Who knows what's happening when people get lost and drop out of one system or the other. We should be thinking about how these changes fundamentally can help us rethink the structure of education and how we can create more equitable experiences for everyone.
It's amazing. Well, I'm so excited to be doing this with you. I think the leadership you all have been showing has already been exciting. And I think it'll be great to have both that expertise, but also that partnership as we build this out.
We're excited too. Thank you.
Let me invite Caleb onto the stage and talk about a shared passion for us, which is the future of assessment. And Caleb, do you want to give a little bit? I mean, I think you all have been nerds on this for some time. It'd be a little bit on just sort of what are some of the purposes that sort of drove this thinking, given how much depth you have on it, but then I'm also pepper you with some questions. But
yeah,
a little bit on what some of the goals are for this assessment program.
Sure. And first of all, let me just say thanks, Kumar, and thank you to the whole Schmidt team. We are thrilled to be working with you guys. You are an inspiration to us, and we're just thrilled to be a part of this competition, working with the other funders. So yes, we are nerds on assessment and testing. And I just ask the audience today that if one of the top 10 moments in your life was taking a test, to throw up a heart emoticon on your Zoom screen for me. So I know if you're really out there. Because honestly, the state of testing and assessment in the country, the headlines aren't good, right? There has been, over the last decade, and we've been following this very tightly, a huge grassroots backlash against testing. So much so that, the people that matter the most, teachers, parents, the students themselves, simply aren't finding tests helpful. That's the national headline. And it's a stark one. And that's the one we want to change. So if I can just say a couple words about that. One is why have we been struggling with this problem for so long when there's so many tools out there to change it? And the answer to that is, honestly, the old trope, it's complicated, right? We do know that there are these historic barriers like cost and time and the sophistication of assessments and, the quality of them. But when you look at the assessment system, even addressing those, that is just helping the existing system do its job a little bit better, direct resources a little more equitably, get programs targeted in the right way. If you layer on top of that what happened with the pandemic, in which for the last year and a half, school got pushed into homes, and you had basically a nation of parents getting a daily look at their kids' classroom experience, well, right, it revealed a ton. It just revealed a ton. And one of the things it revealed is, assessment systems aren't really designed to help parents help their kids. They were never really set up to do that. And that's part of the problem that we want to address. Our challenge to this group, and one of the things we're really excited about is this is probably the best time in history to take this on, because you have big advances in technology. And even like more importantly is just to see the faces on this call. We believe, and we've been working with just this up and coming generation of very smart, very imaginative researchers and designers who are willing to take this problem on, right? Are bringing novel and new ideas to the table, and most importantly, just are willing to like flip the system on its head. So here's what we're excited about. What we're excited about is the whole kit and caboodle. We want people to take on every kind of assessment out there, whether it's formative, whether it's interim, whether it's summative, whether it's diagnostic, whether it's direct to family. We're looking for big, bold, audacious ideas. One of the questions for us around this is, is there going to be more mobility throughout the system? Are people going to move through different sectors, whether it's into the private sector, homeschool for a while, back into the system? And how can we really provide parents, teachers, kids with the kinds of tools that they need to put them on the right educational pathway? That's what we're excited about. We want people thinking big and bold. And the last thing I'll say, Kumar, is that I'm wishing success for every participant in this competition, because the more good ideas, the better, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those funny things where I will continue to have folks who participate in the year one say, oh, we took the proposal we put together for the competition, and now we got this follow-on support from, the National Science Foundation or AES or a number of other players. So I think we want this to be a coordination device that gets people thinking big. And then we want to help as many folks in the competition as well as outside of it get those ideas formulated and create lots of channels for us to do that. And that's partly why we're recruiting, some of the most important long-term funders in this space. Caleb, one thing that I will say that I've been obsessed with assessments for some time. Part of the reason is they're like the thing that has totally fallen out of favor. And so I think we're probably underinvesting and underthinking about the moment we're in. But partly also is, there's so many sort of like the op-eds and thought pieces around, oh, what is the potential for machine learning in education? And my sneaking suspicion is that the place where we're going to get the first breakthrough is probably going to be an assessment. Because ultimately, assessment is a prediction exercise. It's taking small amounts of information and trying to formulate enough of an understanding of learning state for the child or for the adult, and then thinking about what should happen next. And, ultimately, we don't yet have like a particularly good AI assistant that tells me like what to do next. So like the idea of AI instructors might be harder for us, but something that gives us small amounts of information and then gets us on the right learning path, accelerates our learning, figures out what's happening. That feels like it's going to be the thing that falls off the tree first. And so there's a part of me that just, I don't know when that's going to happen, but I do think that now is a moment as people really see, so many tests were taken down, we're kind of in this rebuild moment. And I'd be curious if there's like, sometimes I sort of fall into sort of too much on the technology side, but I'd be curious if there's pieces of it that you think are going to be earlier versus later as you want to give people's sort of advice for what they should come forward with.
Yeah, I'm biased here, so let me just say that at the front end. Like, I'm with you in terms of all the innovation that could happen in education. I happen to believe, and we've got a good team working on this, that we both need to make like revolutionary steps in this assessment space, and we can. Like, there is a lot of reason to believe that there could be, and I was sort of being tongue-in-cheek about put a heart up if it's one of your top 10 experiences, but why wouldn't it be, right? If you look at, like, if you want to believe that assessment can be something that people embrace like joyfully, the evidence is, take a look at your kids like logging hours to learn the latest TikTok dance, or logging days to gain mastery in like Fortnite. You know, you have platforms that just embed this stuff, learning and assessment together in one space so that it's seamless. And if that can happen there, there's no reason in the world it can't happen in our space. I do think the challenge is going to be partly a design challenge. Like if you're you know, traditionally these are set up as systems to serve, you know, the district or the school or the school leader, much less so the other stakeholders like the teachers and the students themselves, the parents. And I think folks that can begin to take on the hard work of thinking outside the box there a little bit are going to accelerate learnings that will apply across the board to the entire system. So my hope is that we're going to have some folks that are really willing to think about the Apple Watch of assessment. You know, that's the parallel of what you carry around with you on your you know, health profile, while we're also solving for the improvements that need to happen to the existing testing regimes that we have today. So surprise me, like surprise me.
So now let's bring in George. And George, I think it'd be great to get your sort of thoughts on, you know, some of the motivations behind how Overdeck is invested in this space, but then also it'd be great if you gave a teaser on the accelerated learning track and what might be some of the goals we have for it. And then I might have a question or two for you.
Great. Well, Kumar, I wanted to start by first thanking you and the Schmidt team. You know, we're thrilled to be part of what you just referred to earlier as the bandwagon for the tools competition. And I want to say that when I first talked to you, Kumar, about the competition, I was really struck by two things. One was the humility of the competition's vision, recognizing that the answers are out there in the world, as well as the sort of confident patience that there is no silver bullet. We had heard earlier about that. Like instead, progress is going to be made through thoughtful, incremental investments in technology and data solutions. And I think that sort of patient capital is critically important to addressing these very large challenges. To answer your question in terms of how we're approaching it at Overdeck, we're really looking, you know, there's a sense of urgency to the work we're doing, right? So the pandemic has revealed some enduring changes to our education system, and you know, some of the learning gaps that have been heightened by school closures and the ongoing challenges around remote or hybrid learning. I'm a parent of an 8-year-old and 10-year-old. So Caleb, when you talk about the window into their world, like I saw that, and it was both painful and, you know, it was a mix of emotions. And then the other thing was the range and levels of academic performance, right? They're wider than ever. But I want to make clear that, to be clear, like the unfinished learning that we're talking about and the need for differentiated content or personalized instructions are challenges that existed well before COVID, right? COVID has just brought it to the forefront in a way that exposed it, in a way that we didn't really see, or unless you were close to the education space, you didn't see. So there's a real opportunity here. At Overdeck, we, you know, while there are many factors that hold students back for reaching their full potential during their learning journey, we're really making a bet in leveraging technology to be a key tool or a key factor to ensure students have access to personalized solutions that measurably enhance, support, and accelerate both their academic and their social emotional learning. And why technology? I mean, we know that tech has an incredible ability to scale, but really more important than just the scale potential is that tech has really become essential and mainstream in many classrooms in ways that it didn't before. We're living with it right now. And there are many, when we look at some of our ed tech type investments, there are unique features and commonalities among many of them that include, that they can easily integrate into everyday learning and teaching. They often optimize for hybrid usage. Third, and most importantly, they really engage with parents. The most successful tools bring parents into the equation. And then they provide the opportunity for more personalized content by providing students with adaptive learning paths, which really gets to the heart of addressing that differentiation challenge. And finally, the capabilities of many tech-enabled tools is really that ability to facilitate small tweaks in teacher messaging and behavior, which can also improve social emotional outcomes correlated with better academic outcomes. And the last thing I'd say about why tech, I think Kumar, you highlighted, I think it was probably Kahn earlier, that look, it's important to understand and recognize the limits of technology, right? Tech alone and what we're talking about here isn't the solution, it's a means to address a problem. And it's important to keep that in mind and not get lost in the tools and the technology alone, but understand how they fit into the larger context that we're talking about.
It's great. One thing that I feel like in some ways acceleration could be considered a very catch-all broad category, but at the same time, if you actually take Shalinee's idea seriously, it's actually a very ambitious category, because what you're saying is, how do we actually not put students on a different track that fall behind? How do we actually think about acceleration, whether it's in school, whether it's through tutoring, whether it's through other strategies? George, you have, I feel like your personal background is quite global, and you've followed edtech with a pretty broad lens. Do you have sort of advice for what, as folks start to put together applications or ways to sort of build partnerships as they apply that might be useful, both bringing a little bit of that global lens that you have?
Yeah, well, I was running Empatico, which is a global ed tech company. I think you highlighted, I think the partnership lens, Kumar, is so critical. It's critical globally, it's critical domestically. None of these problems that we're addressing can be handled with one organization alone, or one idea, or one passionate ED. Instead, they require collaboration across sectors, right? And I think when we look at the cross-sector collaboration, it requires certain specific bridging skills. You need the ability to have empathy, to be able to understand others and bridge that difference, and partner in a way that really addresses some of the root causes. We're not going to address these challenges with just narrow solutions that are focused on individuals or specific organizations. But I think the organizations that are going to do best are those that can partner, and specifically partner in creative ways across some sectors.
And that's great. So I think we're in our final section of our conversation, but I want to really thank all of you for joining us. I'll just sort of talk a little bit about the fourth track that we have, which is actually it's a little meta, but I actually think, again, we strive for nerdy here. And so it's actually, the fourth track is actually on tools to accelerate, learning engineering itself and the actual research tools that build on this. And the reason I'm really excited about this is when I talk to both platforms and to researchers, we're still in the early innings of actually building the tools to be able to run at-scale experiments. So I had this fascinating conversation with the team of Duolingo, where they were trying to figure out, how do you actually run lots of learning science experiments to see, should we teach this aspect of learning a language or this aspect, and does it have an effect? And they couldn't find anything off the shelf, because most things that are, when you say A/B testing commercially, most of that technology is actually very immediate. It's like, it's the buy button. It's like, did you buy it or not? And learning has, you want to check for persistence. Like, where's the person 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now? And a lot of that tooling doesn't actually apply. and they had to build a suite of tools internally. And this comes up all the time, with platforms and others that we'll talk to about how do I actually run experiments on my platform? How do I do this where I don't have to build the tool from scratch, whether it's running a classic A/B experiment, running a combinatorial intervention, and what are all the different ways that research tooling gets easier? If you think about the COVID crisis and the advancements that we made around mRNA, a lot of that was actually platform technology investment that actually started a couple of decades ago to say, well, how do we just do this process a lot more easily? And they had a lot of mistakes along the way. But now mRNA is this platform technology where potentially you could have this wide range of purposes. And so the fourth track that we're going to have in the competition is how do we actually build the tools to be able to generate faster insights about what's working, what's not, that platforms of all different types, whether it's Khan Academy or Newsela or Zearn or others, could put right into use. And what are ways that it can be, it can allow both the research community, technologists, and others to develop this capability faster. So I'm really excited about it. I think we're going to have some. I'm curious as to what people sort of build, and I think it'll get to the kind of underlayer of what makes technologies work that people actually find pretty hard to execute, and it's why sometimes we don't get to have nice things because it's not sort of built in. So with this, we're going to go to sort of our final phase, which is the kind of open Q&A, and I'll just sort of start with the caveat that this isn't like the only Q&A, just one to get started. And as Ulrich and the Learning Agency team have been sharing in the chat, we're going to start to collect lots of questions from you all and be able to do various ways to answer, but this is a chance to get us started. And we're going to have both our competition sponsors will be available in case you have a question for any of them, as well as some of our academic partners who are going to help really ground this work. And so Professor Katie McCarthy is here from Georgia State University. They're one of our academic partners. They're going to be working on this with us alongside Worcester Polytechnic, which also was involved last year. And if folks can continue to add questions in the chat, we'll certainly get through some of them now, but also sort of collect them for a running FAQ and additional webinars that we're going to run both later this month and in August. And so I sort of recommend sort of folks to continue to put them in. So let me go through a few of them that have already come in. So one question I saw was, are there opportunities and resources to help competitors build their teams over time? And what might be ways to sort of do that? So I have two quick answers for that. So first is, a lot of you will be familiar with this, but we helped stand up a learning engineering Google group, which has more than 1,000 members on it. People sometimes find it a little intimidating to post on it, but actually people are quite friendly, and it's got a range of the most senior researchers in the space, as well as students and technologists and platform partners. And people actually found a number of their research partners and just sort of other partners for the competition using that listserv. And so one, I think, recommendation I have is for folks who have ideas, we'll both look to create, the Learning Agency team and others will look to directly connect you, but you should also just use the listserv because that's partly why folks are on there. The second is we're going to have two webinars, and we'll sort of post information for that both in the chat and in the materials on the website. One of them will be on July 27th and another one at the end of August. And if there's like surging demand, we can always do more. The second is, and I think this is already in the chat, but there's going to be a email address, toolscompetition@the-learning-agency, which will be a way that folks can quickly get questions answered. Meg Brenner, who's like the mastermind of putting a bunch of this stuff together and putting and designing the competition, keeps these sort of running, and then we'll do quick tag ups. But they are really fast in getting answers to folks. So I would sort of recommend those as two quick places to start. I think the second question was, can you submit more than one proposal? I think the answer is yes. but maybe I'll pause and see if Meg has a different answer.
No, you can submit more than one proposal. We will, as you get further in the process, we'll probably work with you to figure out which of the proposals is most competitive to minimize the amount of work that you need to do as you develop more detailed proposals.
Amazing. Next question we had was from Devreem, and he said, my question is, can we actually assess student learning without assessing the student? Ooh, this is a good one for Caleb. Caleb, is every proposal an assessment proposal?
This is a great question. We're hoping that there will be a range. I think, of course, when we talk about the way you might think about it traditionally, we're looking at, kind of the academic side of that stuff. But that question is worthwhile, especially in light of the fact that we're going to have kids who are, grappling with issues that are bigger than just their academic challenges. So we'd be excited to see the ideas that are broad ranging here.
Yeah, and one of the big sort of components of the competition is, what is your underlying data instrumentation? That's, I think, one of the things that in the first year people really underappreciated, which is most competitions, I will say, not to throw shade, but most edtech competitions focus on solutions, right? Makes total sense. What's your big solution for the problem? And I think one thing that distinguishes the learning engineering competition from that is we spend a lot of time on the how. Like, what is the actual data infrastructure you have to test as to whether you're going to be able to deliver on that solution, but then to be able to improve it, to be able to bring in additional researchers and others to do that continuous improvement cycle. And so if your underlying data infrastructure, especially if you're a new idea, is, you can have a plan to have that, but that's something that where, we really sort of test to see whether you actually have a plan for being able to measure, improve, and to be able to deliver those insights. So I think that's part of, that, obviously student assessment can be part of that, but just even basic things around how do you know the thing that you're trying to do is actually happening. So next we had Simon, who said, is improving teacher learning as a vehicle for improving student learning in scope? Or do the tools have to be for students? So that's a great question. I feel like Katie was part of our judging panel last year and can speak to this. I'll certainly say that I know Teaching Lab, which was one of the winners, certainly had this as a goal. But Katie, how would you sort of think about this question?
Yeah, well, that Teaching Lab proposal was a favorite of mine. I think they made so clear the linkages between improving teacher learning and student learning in the context that they were operating in. So I think broadly speaking, it's a yes, but also want to be sure that because the scope of what we're trying to do is limited. I think this is true for any application, right? Like, to be reasonable and realistic in your expectations of what your proposal can achieve, because we'd rather see, in my opinion, something with a slightly smaller scale or scope that seems feasible than something that thinks it can do every single thing and can't create sort of clear linkages there.
Great. Yeah, I generally think that it can be, teachers are ultimately, as Shalinee was saying, often one of the key mechanisms for actually driving most educational strategies. So I think leaving them out would definitely not work. I think one of the interesting challenges, at least I saw in the first year of this, is that thinking about what is the right data instrumentation strategy to capture changes in instructor behavior is hard. So I think the Teaching Lab had to do a number of things to start to say, well, how do we know these things we're doing are changing practice that might be changing student outcomes, and thinking about what is that underlying instrumentation. But I would say the Teaching Lab and some of the other winners from first year are are really eager to share what they have learned in building out a data strategy and how they're applying the principles of learning engineering. So for folks who are interested in how to be in that loop with teachers, I think they certainly would be very interesting. And then I think, this is similarly some of our panelists who are working on this, try to measure for this in their underlying strategy. So I think this is a great question. Next question is also from Devreem. He asks, regarding the research tools track, I think the challenge lies in the quantification of qualitative data. I think this is true around what is the right, what do you, ultimately, we're always, it's a tyranny of statistics. If you measure the wrong thing, you can end up driving performance against the wrong goals. And so it is an important question as to what is going to be the way that you sort of collect for what matters. But I think like struggling through that question, and so what might be the qualitative measures that are happening in the real world that you may want to incorporate into your data strategy might matter a lot. And I think I'd be curious if folks have interesting ways that they sort of capture that in the way that they sort of build for it. I will say, we've got folks like Neil Heffernan and others on the assessments platform, which interacts a lot in both, how do people interact with assessments as a platform, but what are all the real world behaviors? And they certainly have developed some ways to track for it. But I think it's a great question as to saying, what is the right way that you start to build in measures for the qualitative data that might be relevant. Next, we had Luis, who says, can you submit a partial proposal? I don't actually know what that question means, but Meg, do you want to sort of talk a little bit about just phase 1 versus phase 2, like the fact that it's a short proposal to start, and then you guys can give people feedback if
Sure.
If you think there's a key component missing as they put together a full application.
Sure. So the initial phase 1 of the competition is designed to be a pretty light lift. You'll complete a short form, which is available on the website, and there's a link in the PDF that we shared. And it's asks for a brief description of the tool and a brief description of your team. With that, we'll review it to make sure it's a fit for the competition generally, and then invite participants to compete for phase 2. And during that time, we'll provide more technical assistance and support to build your team, whether that may connect with a researcher or we'll provide resources to support. So I think there is opportunity to submit a partial idea and then build over time. I think your question may have also been around, does a tool have to be kind of a complete platform? And I think we saw a number of different proposals in the first iteration of the competition, especially in the Catalyst winner category, that were algorithms or elements that could be plugged into a larger platform. So I think there's really an option for a diversity of tools and algorithms that can fit within the competition structure.
Of course. And then as we sort of start to close out, Meg, why don't we finish with a question from Catherine, which was, how does equity and inclusion sort of build in, and what might be ways that folks are evaluated for how are they sort of building in equity at the center of their proposal in the application, which I think you have an answer for, but if you want to just sort of highlight some of the key elements that folks are going to be evaluated against.
Sure. Equity is a key piece of the competition, and we're really excited about that focus. There are going to be a number of different criteria that all proposals are evaluated regardless of the track. One is potential to impact student outcomes or learner outcomes in the adult learning track. One is around equity, one is around learning engineering. And we're also looking for overall team passion and readiness. And so there's going to be more information coming up on the website over time that shares more detailed descriptions about how we'll be evaluating each of those criteria. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to kind of talk more specifically with each of you about how your potential proposal fits against those criteria.
Amazing. And I see that there's like a bunch of great questions coming in that I think we'll have to close out for now. But I think, you know, one of the things that I sort of see is people sort of asking the question of, you know, hey, if I applied last year, can I get feedback to sort of build into next year? And I think, you know, that's definitely something that we want to do, and both on how it did, but also just, you know, ways to sort of capture the current moment that we're in. So let me just sort of close with a few final sort of notes. So first, let me just sort of thank everybody for joining us. This incredible list of sponsors and partners, all of our panelists who are building these meeting products, and all the advisors who make this possible. I'll just say that this takes an incredible amount of work. You know, the learning agency team, our academic partners, and others have been working on this for quite a bit of time. Obviously, this is the beginning, but I want to sort of thank them in advance, and for all of you for doing the work that you do on behalf of children and adults around the world and sort of on this shared mission. Second, I'll just say that, you know, this is the beginning. You know, we sort of gave a teaser for this idea that we want to answer your questions, but I really want to emphasize that you can both email me directly, but also email the learning agency team, and they're going to be incredibly responsive. We've got a bunch of upcoming opportunities for people to do that, both a webinar coming up in the end of July, as well as office hours that the team is really great on. You know, this is one of the things that people really emphasized to me that they really appreciated, which was the opportunity to get direct TA as part of this. And third is just any questions you have. We'll keep this as a running FAQ and send any emails. We're going to keep updating the website. We're going to add the full backgrounder that we sort of teased on this call to it. And, you know, I want to just sort of say that I'm incredibly excited for what we'll get out of this, and I'm excited for all the work that you're going to do. I think the only way people are going to learn about this competition is by getting the word out there. So today was the launch, but you know, this is going to remain open with proposals for October 1. So if you can get the word out among your communities for incredible ideas, that would be immensely appreciated. And with that, let me thank everybody and look forward to working with you on this. Thanks so much.